Hello and welcome. My name is Tamiya Robles. I am the host of this podcast, Adoption Exposed, the Black Orphaned Adopted Foster Child podcast. That is me. I am all of those things, but welcome. I just wanted to start this podcast for a reason because why? I am adopted. I was orphaned. I was a foster child, and naturally, I'm Black. And I noticed that a lot of people have issues, thoughts, they're curious about adoption. Throughout my life, I've heard about other people's stories. Some more extreme than others. And I was never big on sharing my experience per se because I didn't feel as though I had an adoption thing, so to speak. And I didn't think it would be impactful. The issues that I would hear some people have as far as adoptions were concerned, I just didn't have that as far as I knew. But then, as you can see, I have other titles. I was an orphan, I was a foster child. How did these things come into play if you're adopted and you're good? You know what I'm saying? So, I definitely want to get into that. But I wanted to just do an introduction, letting you guys know this is me, this is who I am. But this podcast is going to be extremely personal. Just so you know, I don't edit much. I like to wing things. I like to talk off the top of the dome. I like to talk raw. So sometimes you get the gangster, sometimes you get the super professional. You're going to get whatever is meant to be given at that moment. And hopefully you guys like it. Hopefully you accept it. And I also want you to know that I'm going to be on all platforms, and you're going to be able to hear me on all the major podcasting channels, and you're going to be able to find me on YouTube. And I'm also going to have a Facebook group. A Facebook group is going to be a safe place for anybody and everybody that is either adopted or wants to adopt, has some questions. You guys are followers of mine and you want to discuss the episode. The episodes will be posted there as well. I want this to be a thing. I want this to be a red table talk esque type of platform. And again, hopefully you guys like it. Now, I want to make it absolutely clear. Okay. This is my experience. When you're listening to me and you're listening to me talk about what I've gone through as an adopted child, as a foster child, as an orphan child, and being Black on top of that, you know what I'm saying? These are my personal experiences. So I am not an advocate of other adoptees, foster kids. That's not it. I will interview others so you guys can get a broad spectrum of these topics under adoption. But adoption is something that is a very touchy subject for a lot of people. To me, it's not really touchy. How I was raised when it came to adoption is my mom just made it clear that I was hers, period, point blank. My father, I'm his, period, point blank. And I'm going to actually expose that, explain how that all came about and how that was incorporated into my life. But I did know that I was adopted. They were honest with me about that, and I'll explain that. But it was never a thing. It was never a situation. I was not introduced to the world and to individuals as the adopted person. It was just, something. It was something. But there were a whole lot of other situations and issues that were beyond being adopted. Being adopted was just a thing, you know what I mean? But I know it's not like that for everybody. But I'm not sensitive to anything when it comes to being adopted. But except for one thing in particular, I don't like it when people say that I'm the adopted child. Never heard of it. Nobody said that to me. I just hear that with other people. So I'm making it very clear and plain moving forward on this podcast. I'm not going to ever acknowledge myself as the adopted child. Okay. You know what I'm saying? Unless I'm trying to explain something in particular. But how my family set up is that doesn't exist. And also this would be on the top of the list. My parents are my parents. Those are my quote unquote real parents. That's my real mom. That's my real father. And then I separate the real from the biological. So if you hear me say my parents, if you hear me say my real mom, my real dad, I'm talking about my actual parents that adopted me. And then the biological, I'll get into that. That's a whole other situation. I will give you just a little heads up. I met them. I met one. The one is alive and one is dead. So I met my biological incubator, is what I prefer to call the woman. She had a child and before me, actually a couple months before me. So we're not that far apart in age. I met her. I can get into that. Actually, I wouldn't mind interviewing her and and having a talk. I actually met a couple of biological cousins, right? I'll get into all of that. But my biological father is passed away a couple years before I located the biological side of the family. And then also another heads up, I have no attachment to my biological side in any way, shape, or form. You guys will probably find that to be pretty interesting. So we'll talk about it. But as far as anything being off limits or touchy when it comes to being adopted, I really don't have any of those issues except that those two things. I'm not the adopted person in my family. I'm not the uh my my parents are my parents. They're my real parents. They're my actual parents. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. So I just wanted to say that real quick. I'm going to get off of this thing. My intros are kind of weird. Like, this is my second podcast. I have another podcast if you want to check me out. It has nothing to do with adoption. It's called Coast to Coast Credit Podcast, and you can find me anywhere, on the platforms. But if you hear both of my intros, they sound like weird and awkward. So I want to apologize for that. But I just wanted to let y'all know this is who I am. This is what this podcast is about. It's going to get deep. It's going to get personal. It's going to have its ups and downs. If you can't take that, I would recommend you do not follow. If you can, please follow. Please share. There's a lot of people that there's a whole community of the in the adoption world. Okay, and it needs to be discussed. It needs to be discussed and understood. There's so many different facets when it comes to this topic, and I just am so excited to share this with you and talk about it and make this a platform for everybody. Once I started thinking about this, something came over me to actually do a podcast about this topic. I was just stuck on my other podcast. I love my podcast. And then something came over like, hey, talk about this. And another reason is everybody else in like outside of me is talking about this when I'm the adopted one. Like, I'm the orphaned one. I was the one that went into foster care. You didn't. Like, for example, I have an aunt, and I don't care if she hears this because that's just who I am. You guys are gonna get used to it. I'm a Philly chick. I'm a Capricorn. I take pride in that. You're gonna hear that through this podcast. And one thing about me is I really don't care about your feelings. Fuck your feelings. When it comes to facts, you understand? I don't care, especially in the adoption world. I don't care about how you feel. You weren't the adopted one. You know what I mean? You weren't in it. Okay, so I'm going to speak freely. But like hearing other people, other family members, and especially my aunt, like talking about this topic when it never happened to you. People feel that they're adopted, but you weren't adopted. To feel adopted and be adopted are two different fucking things. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to put all of that shit on the table. So you guys are going to get an earful. It's going to be bananas, right? And you're going to be able to hear me and see me on YouTube and just definitely on my podcast and my platforms if you just want to listen. All right. But check me out. I thank you guys for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Bye bye.